Good news, Australia is not on its own in standing up to the Chinese dictatorship. Help is on its way, this time from Britain, of all places. Britain is sending a naval group, including the huge new aircraft carrier, HMAS Queen Elizabeth, to sail around the world and through the South China Sea to our north. Now, China's stolen that sea illegally and built military bases there. It's now warning off the planes and boats of other countries which come near.
U.S. military aircraft, Papa 8 Alpha. This is Chinese Yun's Reef. China has sovereignty of the national islands, including Yun's Reef and its adjacent waters. Leave immediately and keep far off. Philippine military aircraft, I'm warning you again. Leave immediately, or you will bear for responsibility for all the consequences.
That's how these bozos in this dictatorship talk these days. But Britain is now sending a signal to South China Seas, which include very important shipping lanes for Australia. They're not China, that's not China's lake. We can sail through it, and we will. And Australian frigates will join this British sail-through, like we've done with the American sail-throughs. Now, all this points to the real news from the weekend summit in Britain of leaders of the big G7 democracies. Our Prime Minister, by the way, was also invited and had a meeting with both US President Joe Biden and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, where the big topic was not global warming, as the ABC seems to think, but China, the threat in our Indo-Pacific region.
It was important to discuss the issues I was seeking discussion in relation to the Indo-Pacific, both with the United States and the United Kingdom. And so that is what we sought, and that is what we did. And I think that was a very useful meeting.
And President Biden, like Morrison, wanted this meeting to show a united front of democracies against China particularly.
I know this is going to sound somewhat prosaic, but I think we're in a contest, not with China per se, but a contest with autocrats, autocratic governments around the world, as to whether or not democracies can compete with them in the rapidly changing 21st century. And I think how we act and whether we pull together as democracies is going to determine whether our grandkids look back 15 years from now and say, did they step up?
Joining me from London is Brendan O'Neill, editor of the online magazine Spike. Brendan, thank you for joining me. I wish Joe Biden didn't sound so old and doddery, particularly on this issue, but I think he is spot on. And I wonder whether the West, particularly Europe, is now doing what's needed to defend democracy from China.
It's hard to tell. I mean, at the G7, they talked a good fight, but whether they are willing to stand up to those who oppose democracy, as Biden says, I mean, that does remain to be seen. My feeling is still, even though they're making some interesting noises and they're having some interesting discussions, I still think Western governments don't really know what to do about China. Because on the one hand, China is an economic powerhouse. There is a shift of power taking place in the world, which makes many people feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, China is obviously doing some absolutely dreadful things. It has crushed the democracy movement in Hong Kong. It is waging an incredible campaign of repression against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang. It denies its own people, of course, the basic rights of democracy, the right to freedom of speech, the right to vote. This is a deeply, deeply problematic regime, and our governments have to deal with it because of economic issues, but they are reluctant to look like they are siding with it on political issues. So I think they're a little bit torn, and I don't think they've got their story straight just yet.
And I wonder whether they've put the work in their military as well, some of the European countries. But look, thank you, Brendan, for sending over your aircraft carrier. We're very grateful. Now, when it comes to Joe Biden, he's doddery enough, but honestly, Boris Johnson seems a little wobbly too, I have to say, at least ideologically. He's supposed to be a Conservative Prime Minister, but he gave the G7 leaders a very woke message about how to rebuild their economies from this pandemic havoc. Here he is.
We're building back better together and building back greener and building back fairer and building back more equal and how shall I, in a more gender neutral and perhaps a more feminine way.
Brendan, I don't know whether it's just trying to get a rise out of us, but can you explain how politicians can be both gender neutral but also more feminine And what does it actually mean to rebuild in a more feminine way? And which Conservative voters actually asked for any of that?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, it just looked like he was flinging out buzzwords. You know, it sounds like he's heard the term gender neutral, thinks it will win him some woke brownie points, and then decided to use it. I mean, it has no meaning. As you say, what does it mean to build back in a gender neutral way? That just doesn't have any substance to it at all. I hear the influence of his wife, Carrie Simmons, now Carrie Johnson, Boris Johnson's wife, who is an incredibly woke agitator in Downing Street, apparently always encouraging Boris Johnson to adopt the kind of causes that ordinary working class voters who put him into power are not remotely interested in. So there is a huge disconnect. I think, you know, lots of people look on Boris as this warrior against wokeness. I'm not convinced that's true. He was very slow to condemn the tearing down of statues. He uses terms like gender neutral. He says that football fans have the right to take the knee, but they probably shouldn't. He's very cagey on culture war issues rather than taking a clear line. And I think some of his comments at the G7 made that obvious.
Yeah, Brendan, it's also giving Australia green lectures that we should do more. I mean, what's going on? Is that what people voted for? I don't recall that.
No, absolutely not. You know, people voted for Boris Johnson to get Brexit done, to get Britain back on track, to make it an independent nation with economic investment and a good economic future. They didn't vote for all this green lecturing. They didn't vote for all this gender neutral nonsense. They didn't vote for wokeness being snuck in by the back door of Downing Street. So Boris Johnson needs to be quite careful here, I think, because he was lent these votes by working class people who normally vote for the Labour Party, and they could easily take those votes away. He needs to listen to what people want rather than listening to his wife and other woke people around Westminster.
Absolutely. Look, I have to say, I do suspect too the voice is coming from the pillar next door, not the voters. That's the one he's listening to. Humans are all alike. We're all Macbeth in the end. Thank you very much for your time, Brendan O'Neill.
Thanks, Andrew.